This is part 5 of our basic economic videos. We're going to talk about what macroeconomics is, and it is in fact studying big economies like countries as opposed to studying individual families or individual economics. So let's talk about how supply and demand affects business. If you've not seen the videos on supply and demand, I suggest you pause and go back and watch those first. We have seen how supply and demand can affect prices on a single product. Let's think about how that affects prices in general. All product prices, and that's called an aggregate in the technical terminology, in a country, region, or economy, on average move if demand by significant numbers of people suddenly increases or decreases. So for example, if a strong economy causes incomes in the country to suddenly increase, what happens to the demand and the price of new cars? Well, obviously, we've all seen this when a lot of people go out and start buying cars, the price of cars goes up. The second example, what happens to interest rates if people fear the economy is going to slow down and they save money rather than spend it? Well, this is kind of an obtuse one. I'm going to let you think about it. My hint is there more or less money circulating when that happens? Money is subjected to supply and demand. So some things down here, these shift demand: buyer's income, buyer's preferences and taste. The prices of substitute products, those are things that you can use instead of another product. Expectations about future prices and number of buyers. And the blue ones over here, they shift supply. That's technology. So for example, maybe more efficient manufacturing. Resource prices, raw materials, are they going up or down? Changes in prices of other products that can be used to produce the same thing. So if a lot of cars are being sold and you use steel in your products, well, your cars may not be related to your product at all, but if the price of steel is going up because cars are being sold, more cars are being made, that's going to affect you. Number of suppliers, yes, as the number of suppliers increase or decrease, that'll change the prices and taxes. So this is a repeat. Macroeconomics is the study of an economy as a whole, or with large groups of people, products, corporations, what have you. A nation's economic health depends on three main goals of macroeconomics: economic growth, so we've covered that in another video; price stability, inflation, deflation, and we've also covered that one. And the next thing we haven't covered is employment. So full employment by definition is when all people who want to work and can work have jobs. Now in the US, the definition is not exactly the same as in the rest of the world. But when we talk about unemployment, it's usually the unemployment rate. It's not the average, or it's not a definite number. It is like the number of people that has changed since last week. So it's either new people looking for jobs or people who found jobs. So it's the percent of newly unemployed people actively looking for work, and it's the change from the prior time as a percent. The US does not count people who are out of work longer than 90 days. So this skews the numbers. Frictional unemployment is also called natural unemployment, and that's when people are between jobs. That's not related to the business cycle. That's just, a person who has skills like a welder, they quit one job, they go look for another one. So that would be frictional unemployment. Seasonal unemployment, that is caused by changes in seasonal demand. So a construction worker may not have as much work during the wintertime, or if it's a rainy season or what have you. And tour guides will not have as much work during tourist low seasons. So finally, retail stores will hire people around busy times, holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, what have you. Structural unemployment, and this is from a lack of required skills. It's not related to business cycles. So people who have a lack of education, or maybe just a lack of skills, they can become easily structurally unemployed. They're anticipating that this is going to impact these people a lot. But for example, maybe there's a lot of houses being built in your area, but if you don't have construction skills, then that's not going to help you find a job. Cyclical unemployment. This is because of poor economic conditions. It's considered the best indicator, but on the other hand, it's really hard to calculate. And for example, it's people who get laid off from a factory, maybe a car manufacturing plant, because there's an economic downturn and people aren't buying cars, so they don't need as many workers on the assembly line. It's usually assumed that changes in employment that follow recessions or growth are from cyclical unemployment. However, in the US in 2003, 2004, and 2009, the economy grew and unemployment also grew. So yeah, there was something kind of broken. Some firms are more sensitive to economic changes. Food sales, not so much. New car sales are a lot more sensitive. So how does the government use monetary policy and fiscal policy to achieve its macroeconomic goals? So these are the big picture goals. There are two types of government policy that influence economic conditions. One is monetary and one is fiscal. The two types of government policy that influence economic conditions are one, monetary policy, and two, fiscal policy. Monetary policy is money policy, and it's decisions on the levels of money supply, how much money is in circulation. The central banks of the country typically set that monetary policy. So in the US, it's the Fed. In England, it's the Bank of England. The money supply is defined as the total amount of money, cash, coins, and balances in bank accounts available to be loaned in circulation. So yeah, it's just basically cash in circulation. The money supply is commonly defined to be a group of safe assets that households and businesses can use to make payments or to hold as short-term investments. Again, it's cash-like stuff. It's stuff that can easily be converted to cash or cash-like stuff. It does not include things like land or buildings. Interest rates are the cost of money. So like when you pay interest on your credit card, your house, whatever, basically what you're doing is you're paying someone else to borrow their money. You're using their money, and that is the price of using someone else's money. So it's usually set by the central banks, and or they can also use money to buy or sell government bonds, and that affects interest rates as well. We'll go into that in just a second. Interest rates are also influenced heavily by supply and demand. If there's high supply, it's a low price. So if there's a lot of cash out there sitting there not doing anything, the interest rates go down and vice versa. There are two monetary sub-policies. One is the expansionary policy. So if the government spends money to buy bonds, so a bond is a piece of paper, they look like this over here. If a government spends money to buy those bonds, then more money is put into the money supply in circulation. Yes, so the government takes money out of its pocket and it puts it into the pocket of ordinary people. When money moves from government to public, money supply goes up, interest and unemployment goes down, because we said when there's more money available in circulation, then interest rates go down, supply and demand. Inflation increases, prices go up. Economies grow, they expand because inflation, and I should say, inflation is a normal outcome of that growth. So contractionary, shrinking policy is when the government sells bonds. And so when the government sells bonds, they are taking cash out of circulation, putting it in their pocket, and they're giving people a piece of paper. So that the money is taken out of the money supply, it moves from the public to the government, and interest rates will go up. Again, supply and demand. Money moves from the public to the government. Money supply goes down, interest and unemployment goes up, lowers inflation, prices go down, economy contracts, deflation, recession, etc. So the central bank can do both. They can buy and sell bonds, and they can set interest rates. So let's move on to fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is how the federal government spends money and sets tax rates. And that affects how much money is available for other purchases. So the federal government can change tax rates as necessary. Personal income tax, we all pay personal income tax. They can change our tax rates. Reducing taxes give people more after-tax income. They spend money, and that helps push economic growth. Several presidents in my lifetime have done that. Increasing taxes, well, if you increase taxes, then people have less money to spend after tax, and that can actually shrink spending, shrink the economy. Corporate taxes, not unlike personal taxes. The government controls the taxes, and taxes lower profits. That's the money that companies can spend that's left over. The government lowers corporate taxes from, say, 30% to 25%. So at 30%, if they have $10 million, they pay taxes. So 10 million times 30%, they would pay $3 million in taxes. At 25%, $10 million, taxes would be 25% rather of 10 million, so 2.5 million. And the difference between these two is 500,000. What could the company do with that extra money? Well, they can invest, they can give it to employees, etc. Another type of fiscal policy is excise tax, taxes on a specific good or services at the time they're purchased. So, a beer tax, cigarette tax, gambling taxes, things like that. They're usually federal. It raises the cost of production and lowers consumption, and that's oftentimes the goal, is just to remove. They're called sin taxes because they discourage people from doing certain behaviors that may be deleterious to themselves or to society in general. So there are taxes at a percent or by unit on production, included in the product price and usually hidden from end customers. So things like, again, gambling, tobacco, fuel, if it's imported, and alcohol taxes. Property taxes, for some odd reason, are also included in this category. Let's talk about budget deficits. This is simply when the government spends more than it takes in from taxes and other sources. If the government receives, say, $800 billion in taxes because the economy is not that strong, but they spend $1 trillion, then it has to borrow the difference, which is $200 billion. And since it's borrowing from available funds for loans, it is lowering the amount of cash available. And so therefore, supply and demand, interest rates increase. The federal government strategy to cover a deficit can be to sell treasury bonds. So investors buy a bond from the government and they get interest for a specific period of time, and then they get the principal back. It's like a CD from the government. So if you've ever had a CD from the bank, this is like a CD from the government. They can increase taxes. Yeah, that increases their revenue. It's not popular. It's a good way to get voted out of office. And it also dampens economic activity because people have less money to spend. And they can print more money. So in extreme cases, they can just turn on the printing presses. And it covers the expenses. However, it usually drives inflation and devalues the currency. A local government can do deficit spending by introducing new taxes or increasing existing taxes. Same. They can reduce spending on government services. Yeah, it's a little easier to do it at the, like, say, the state or county level. Or they can borrow money from public bond sales, or they can also borrow money from the federal government. Okay, so let's talk about crowding out. So the government gets its money and it spends building stuff. It can be roads, but let's say they build a hospital. So what happens is, if the government builds a hospital, then a private hospital is not needed. So this is called crowding out. So when the government starts building certain things, then private things don't need to be made. And yeah, people will complain about that. So let's say government builds a hospital, then people spend less money on private medical care. Well, that could be good or bad depending on your view. Government builds a subway, buys buses, and then fewer cars are sold. So that's how it impacts the private sector. So when government issues debts, there are pros and cons. And you may say, well, debt is always a bad thing. No, it's not always a bad thing, but it can have unexpected effects on business and on individuals. So government debt contributes to economic growth. Well, that's a good thing, right? And if you do it properly, if you invest properly, say you build up good roads. So I've seen second world countries really develop strongly because they invested in roads, and therefore they could get products that they brought out of the fields, agricultural products, or products that they dug out of the ground, minerals, and they could move it to market faster, more efficiently, in larger quantities. And therefore it boosted the economy, and actually the government made more money from taxes than they did by not having the debt. High employment. Okay, so yeah, those are the pros. The cons is not everyone gets to hold the debt. Because when you buy debt, you're making interest on that debt, right? And it's very secure debt. But the rich can buy more of that debt than most of us, and they get more interest, and they can actually get more interest than they pay in taxes. So in effect, motivating the government, when the rich push the government to borrow money, they can end up in a situation where they are making more interest from the government than they are paying in taxes, which is not a desirable situation. And again, it crowds out private investment. So when we think about this, who gets the economic growth and who gets the debt? Well, the economic growth happens for the people who are living, and the debt is usually passed on to future generations. So yes, this is why a lot of people scream about it. And yeah. Okay, so now you are all economic experts like Arnold Schwarzenegger, ex-governor of California, Kate Blanchett, actress, Mick Jagger, Rolling Stones, Tiger Woods, golfer, Kofi Annan, past UN General Secretary, Lionel Richie, singer-songwriter, Steve Ballmer, CEO of Microsoft, Diane von Furstenberg, fashion designer, Paul Newman, actor, William Shatner. Yes, all these people had economic degrees. Okay. End of economics 1 through 5. Let's move on to the next topic.